Hi, everybody. Mark Foncannon here again from the College of Letters and Science. Today, I have three faculty with me from our college to talk about their experience with remote learning. So I will have them introduce themselves, and then we will get some questions and answers going here. Professor Endele, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Bryan Endele. I am in the faculty in the chemistry department. I teach the Chem 2 classes, which are general chemistry classes, the first year classes. They're typically very large, somewhere around 450 to 550 students that are broken up into discussion sections and lab sections. And I'm primarily focused on teaching, chemical education, focused on preparing grad students, the labs, all the things that go into chemistry too.
Professor Ruiz.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Ruiz. I'm in the Department of Communication, and I also teach a variety of courses for the department and have been teaching online for quite a few years now, so I felt a little bit more comfortable when we went remote. My classes vary in size, anywhere from 500 plus to 7 for the smaller grad classes, but much like Professor Endele, I also prepare grad students to learn to teach. So when they move on into their positions as faculty, they'll have some experience and a go-to person to rely on if they have questions or concerns. And I'm excited to be with you all.
Great, thank you. Professor Luck.
Good morning. I'm Steve Luck. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology. My main teaching in the psych department is the large introductory psychology course, which I've been teaching for several years now. And I teach it in a hybrid format ordinarily, where the lectures are online videos, but then we have in-person discussion sections. I also spend a lot of time on research. I am a cognitive neuroscientist, which means that I'm at the intersection of psychology and neuroscience. I'm interested in how people perceive and attend to information and store it in memory. And I look at that by putting electrodes on the heads of college students and measuring brain activity while they do various tasks. And that research has actually really helped me put together my classes, because a lot of being a college student is maintaining your attention and getting information into memory. And those are my areas of research. So I've really used my research to help my teaching.
Great. Great. Well, to start, let's just go with the number one question people are asking. How has remote teaching for you all and remote learning for your students been going, particularly over spring quarter and as we're moving into summer and into fall? How has remote teaching and remote learning been going for you all?
I would say the transition for me personally was rough, because I had spring break to transition everything, lab, discussion, office hours, exams, lecture, to be online, so that the students could have as smooth a transition as possible. It was getting used to the technology, not only myself, but the students getting used to the technology. But we made it. I think by the end of the quarter, it was going much more smoothly and people had got into a rhythm, and I had learned a lot. So I'm taking this summer to prepare not only myself, but the whole general chemistry series to be a smooth online transition for all the new students, because my classes are typically first year students.
Dr. Ruiz, what was your experience this last quarter?
I think I was very fortunate in that I'd had, as I said, experience teaching online already. And so one course was ready to go because it's a fully online course where we do our discussions, our lectures, our testing, everything online. So that was relatively easy to anticipate and prepare for. But like Professor Endele, I did have a very short turnaround to prepare a different course that had never been online, that historically has been very face-to-face, very interactive, relied upon student feedback to move forward with what types of topics we dove into a little bit more. And so I was very concerned about that class. Luckily, I think my comfort with the technology made that transition a little bit smoother. And I was concerned about how my students would react and how they would engage, or more importantly, whether they would engage in an online format. But they really stepped up, and the process ended up being, like Dr. Endele said, a little bit rough in the beginning, but very quickly the students and I were able to figure out how we wanted to engage and interact, and made decisions together about when we would meet and in what format, and what things would be synchronous and what things would be asynchronous. And so it was very much a partnership. And as a result, I think it ended up working out rather well.
Dr. Luck, we've talked a little bit about, or heard a little bit about, students engaging in the classes. And I know you've taught remote as part of your hybrid course. How have you seen students engaging with each other, but also with you through this remote environment?
Yeah, the engagement part is really tricky, and we put a lot of work into making sure that students are engaged. And you're right, you want to have them engaging with each other as well as with the faculty. You know, if I teach a large class, I can't be engaging with every single student every moment, but the students learn a ton from each other. And we've done a lot to try to facilitate that in the online format. And we learned a lot, as some of the other professors have said, we've learned a lot over the course of the spring quarter about how to do that. So, for example, one of the things that many professors in psychology ended up using, and we've all shared notes and tried to work together on this, is we do a lot of work with like Google Docs or Google Sheets, where during a class period, you have multiple students all working together, answering questions on a shared sheet, so they can all see what everybody else is doing. And that really works pretty well. And then the professor can see those things as well. And then I can also drop in on little groups of students while they're talking about what they're writing and that sort of thing. And it works pretty well. It's not quite the same as the regular classroom, but it has gotten a lot better. And this fall, it's going to be much better.
Dr. Luck, how has the testing of your students been happening? How have you been assessing their comprehension of the material?
So mainly what I and my other psychology colleagues have been doing is moving toward open note, open book tests, rather than trying to have students, you know, alone at home with the internet right there and their book right there and tell them, no, you can't use those resources. And this has actually been a good thing, because we shouldn't be asking students questions that they can just look up in a book, right? Once they graduate, if they need to know an answer to a question like that, they can just find the book. What we're really trying to teach people at the University of California, Davis, is how to understand things at a deep level and how to apply what they've learned to new situations. That's what they need after they graduate. And so by having to rewrite all of our test questions to focus on those sorts of things like deep understanding and application, those things can't be looked up on Google. They can't be looked up in the textbook. And so we're really asking the kinds of questions that we should have been asking all along. So I'm actually quite happy with the way testing has gone. And once this remote teaching is over, we're going to continue in a lot of classes to do that kind of testing, because it really is what we want the students to know.
We've taken a similar approach in the Department of Communication as psychology has, and really worked to rework the type of questions that we ask the students. And many of us also went open note, open book for the same reasons that Dr. Luck pointed out. It's really about, can you take what you've learned and show that you've understood it to the point that you can apply it either to a different situation, or that you can, we had situations where we would ask the students to essentially teach us something. So one of the questions was, if you were to have to teach this to a neighbor, a colleague, how would you go about doing that? How would you structure that and organize that? And so it's that type of questioning that digs in a much deeper level than we had in the past, when a student could rely on rote memorization. And we know from the research, the most current research, rote memorization only lasts for so long. So how well do we want the students to retain the information? And we know that by ensuring that they go at a deeper level of understanding, they're more likely to remember this in a few years rather than just a few weeks. We did intend, and we did try actually to do some kind of online proctoring, and it had worked in the past quite well, but there were a few hiccups, and mostly that had to do with just the large number of people who were now also relying on that type of testing. And so the systems just weren't ready and weren't in place, I think, for a lot of institutions to be able to move very quickly in that direction. And so I think having a good balance of the two is helpful, because it depends also on the level, again, of understanding for some things that we would like to have a little more insight on, but some things I like to have the students feel good about being able to quickly go, oh, that's this, and I can quickly answer that in a multiple choice question, for example. And so I think it'll be much better in the fall when we are better at the items, the software and developers and whatnot that are looking to help us engage in that way will be more ramped up to speed so that we can do a mixture of those types of questions.
Dr. Endele, you're teaching some chem labs. So how are you assessing your students' comprehension of that material through a remote environment?
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience. They're not getting the sort of tactile experience that they might be used to. So what we've done is they're still coming to lab. It'll be asynchronous starting in the fall, but there will be a TA and they'll have their lab section. They will be watching the lab being done by us on video, and it'll be spliced through in pieces. And this is essentially what we did in the spring. We're just have improved and augmented on the process. So they'll still get to see everything. They'll get to see the techniques. They'll get to hear a conceptual and have a conceptual discussion with their TA. And then after they're done, we're giving them some randomized data sets so that they can still do the analysis themselves and still go through that analytical procedure. So we've augmented from what we've done in the spring, but we're pretty happy with where we've landed right now.
I wanted to add, if I could, that one of the other features that we've moved to is rather than having a quote unquote test, that a lot of the assessments have moved into, can the students apply something for us particularly into projects where they walk away not only being able to, where we're able to evaluate whether or not they've understood something, but where they can walk away with something that they could show a potential employer. So they have something in hand that's very applicable to what we would call real life, as if education, life in college isn't real, but we often say that as we teach things. In real life, you will apply the following, but they're able to do that and work with, in my class, with a real client, and they produce, they're evaluated on what they've produced for this real client. And it's been really amazing to see how well they've done in this virtual environment, because as we're showing now, the reality is, at least in the very near future, for my students who are who graduated in the spring and who will be graduating next year, this may be the way they work. And so to have provided the skills for them to be able to work in a group virtually and engage in a group virtually to produce something is pretty amazing. And it was great to see how excited they were to see those end results. So there's more than just testing, but there's an ability to evaluate how students are doing with real life, real world projects that they can, again, use in a portfolio or to share with potential employers.
That's great. That's great. Dr. Luck, are your students also working on projects together? How do they, how are you seeing students working together, building community through your classes in this environment?
So in the introductory psych class, there isn't really the opportunity for projects, but in the spring, I also taught a small research class. This is for about a dozen students who all work in my lab ordinarily. Of course, the lab is shut down right now. So what we did instead was we focused on giving them more of the background information that they would need so that when they come back to the lab, they'll be able to kind of take the next step up and do more sophisticated research. And at the same time, in addition to the class, each of them was working with a graduate student or a postdoc as a mentor. And we've been trying to move a lot of our research online, so they've been helping us out with that. And so they're working in small groups over Zoom, just as we are now, in order to develop materials, to talk about coding procedures, all that sort of